Let's talk about cognitive decline. Let's talk about Alzheimer's disease specifically. There are a number of different reasons why people experience cognitive decline, and perhaps we all do to a certain extent. Maybe I did when I was 20, because if I don't write it down, I don't remember it a week later either. But let's talk about Alzheimer's disease. And the first thing that's really striking about Alzheimer's disease is if you look at a map of the world, you see places where it's virtually non-existent, and then you see places where it's quite prevalent. And the places where you see a high incidence of Alzheimer's disease are places like the United States, Australia, westernized countries where people eat a lot of meat and dairy, animal food, terrible diets. Influences on Alzheimer's disease, we have very clear research to show this. The more animal food you eat, the more saturated food you eat, the more iron you take in, the higher your risk of Alzheimer's disease. And it's maybe one of the most horrible things that can happen to an individual, and it has a profound effect not only on the person, but all of the people around that person who end up taking on an increasing burden of taking care of the individual, who often ends up in some type of nursing facility because the family reaches a point where they just can't take care of the person, watch them 24 hours a day anymore. So the best way to prevent Alzheimer's disease is to adopt a whole foods, low-fat, plant-based diet, because we know the mechanisms that cause and increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. We also know that the diets in areas where Alzheimer's disease incidence is low are plant-based, whole food, low-fat. One other thing I'll mention is there's some very good studies that have looked at the effect of diet on people who have particular genetic predisposition to develop Alzheimer's disease. And when an individual who's genetically predisposed to develop Alzheimer's starts eating the right diet, makes the right choices, research shows that that person benefits more than an individual in the general population without the genetic predisposition in terms of reducing risk. So this is another example of a genetic predisposition is not a life sentence. It doesn't have to be. Are there other influences on Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline? And there are. Social engagement would be one. Doing things that are mentally stimulating. And it doesn't matter what it is. You can learn a new language, you can belong to a book club and read, you can take up a hobby, but people who are socially engaged and engaged in activities that require some type of mental acuity are less likely. Physical activity is a big help. Okay, so let's now talk about what happens if somebody begins to show the early signs of cognitive decline or Alzheimer's disease. If intervention takes place at that point, where you take the person and say, definitely we're recognizing the signs of Alzheimer's disease or cognitive decline. So we're going to get you busy doing something and get you involved in your church. It doesn't matter what it is. You're going to have hobbies. You're going to drink enough water every day. You're going to eat good food. I have seen in our own membership base people who have made astounding recoveries because it was early stage. Now, as this condition progresses, you reach a point where I don't think intervention is going to make a huge difference. And in fact, it becomes increasingly more difficult to do some type of intervention because the person becomes resistant. You can't reason with the person. Early stage, you can say, look, this is what's happening, and if we do these things, we can keep it from happening. And there's enough mental acuity left that that person can read books, go someplace, have conversations with people, play computer games or whatever, all the strategies that you're going to use. But obviously at a certain point of degeneration, that's not possible. So the best case scenario is people start eating well earlier and they don't end up having early signs of Alzheimer's. Early stage, if people knew the real cause of Alzheimer's disease, they would probably seek intervention earlier, but unfortunately that's not what's happening, and so that's why a lot of people end up committed to facilities that specialize in taking care of Alzheimer's patients.